Now, we talk a lot about business turnarounds on this podcast, but right now the whole country needs a turnaround. So how do we get out of this downturn and build a vibrant economy so that the new normal is even better than the old normal? Michael Fingland from Vantage Performance reckons it involves the same process as a business turnaround, and now we have a real chance for real change. So let's start talking about what the future will look like and how we get there. And it can all start now. I'm Phil Dobbie. That's today on the Vantage Performance Podcast. So yes, a turnaround plan for Australia. Michael Fingland from Vantage Performance has been giving a lot of thought to this. And as usual, he's got a three-point plan. He's a man who loves his three-point plans. And this plan will give us a very different future. Michael, I mean, you're obviously more familiar with turning around businesses, not turning around the whole country. So what's going on here? Have you got your sights set on the Prime Minister's job?
No, look, Phil, for us, it's quite simple. I mean, we've just taken the same sort of philosophy that we would for a group, a company group, and applied that to the economy. And I mean, I've said this for I don't know how long now. You know, the Australian economy is the biggest company in the land. I mean, it's you know, you need to look through that lens when you're running the country. It is the country's biggest business. So, I mean, when you think about the typical way we approach turnarounds, it's a very similar approach, and we've just, as I said, applied that lens. You know, what are those 1 to 2 big changes in strategy that we always talk about? And you know, when you overlay that framework that we use to turn businesses around, it's very, very similar and very straightforward in terms of, you know, how do you stimulate revenue? I mean, as we've talked about, there's two ways to sort of fixing the profit and loss, if you like, or GDP in this case. You either have strategies that are going to grow the top line revenue, or strategies that are going to cut costs, or a combination of both. And really, with economies, it's more about how do you grow the pie, how do you grow revenue? Because that, even with a lower taxation regime, there's more total dollars in tax being delivered to government coffers, which they can then spend, you know, on the economy in a whole range of different areas, health, education, etc. So the plan that we want to run through today is really, we've used the same principles that we would apply to a corporate turnaround, because it is a big business as we've outlined. And what are those 1 to 2 big changes in strategy that we would normally look for to build our typical 3-point plan?
And that is it, isn't it? The fact that we can actually make big changes now, because normally you look at the way governments operate and, you know, we're sort of tweaking the edges. There's never an opportunity to make big changes because it's politically very difficult to do that. But we've gone through such a crisis, or we're still going through such a big crisis. This is an opportunity, and it's good to see some opportunity coming out of this. It's an opportunity for big changes.
And that's exactly the same correlation with corporates. So normally, before they get into a real crisis, you know, corporates and their management teams and boards will look at doing some restructuring with their business, but it's difficult to do the big radical things. It's difficult to do the painful things because there's so much, internal
momentum.
The crisis isn't big enough for all stakeholders to all get on board, and that's what this crisis has presented, is a huge opportunity where even state and federal leaders, you know, from opposite ends of the spectrum, are all coming together to find a way through this. So we have this huge opportunity to restructure the Australian economy. And come out of this with a much stronger economy and just using that same process. You know, as I say, never waste a good crisis. And you need a crisis, like in corporate turnarounds, to get everyone on the table, agree on those big radical changes so we can turn around as fast as we can.
Well, one of those big changes, I mean, this has been talked about for decades, hasn't it? That the Australian economy is far too dependent on digging stuff out of the ground and shipping it overseas without adding any value to it. I mean, that's got to be the first area to look at. And your first point is that we need a manufacturing incentive program for Australia.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, and I'll say that, fortunately, we have actually outsourced so much manufacturing over the last 10, 20 years. Now, it's hurt us on the way through, don't get me wrong, but for now, there would be and there will be a huge jobs boost if we come up with a manufacturing incentive program that incentivizes manufacturers to bring manufacturing back onshore, because that's akin to an equity injection into the economy. There'll be a whole bunch of new jobs created by bringing that manufacturing back onshore. We'll need to be selective as to what type of manufacturing, perhaps, but incentives, tax incentives, and other incentives, both state and federal, for manufacturers to bring their manufacturing back onshore. So that is a surefire way to really boost the economy and boost jobs. So not only re-onshoring manufacturing that has left our shores over the last decade or so, but also initiatives to encourage local manufacturers to start up and expand. So they're the two bedrocks for me, that they will grow the economy much faster than anything else. And then you combine that with a common strategy around, and we've done it before and it was very successful, is Buy Australian Made. Yeah. There is a lot of angst and unrest in the economy, and a lot of sort of patriotism sort of coming back that we've lost. Yeah. So I think you're going to see a real strengthening of that Aussie culture, we can do this better than anyone else type mentality. And if we all spend an extra 10, 20% on buying local, that again will boost the economy no end.
Well, what's Dick Smith doing these days? Are we going to bring him out of retirement for this? Maybe he's the figurehead we need.
He's perfect for the comms strategy.
Absolutely. But and also, I mean, I guess the other thing as well is to make sure that we are protecting ourselves from vulnerabilities, so that we're not facing the same issue again. So, for example, all around the world, everybody is fighting for medical equipment. We should be making that stuff ourselves, shouldn't we?
Well, that's what you're going to see now. There'll either be significant incentives or government-owned enterprises that are established just to manufacture the core essentials that we were clearly caught short on. So PPE, certain vaccines, that's a must. We have to have a level of protection. And not China manufactures 90% of the world's medicine. I mean, that is just begging for a crisis.
And we've got one, and we've seen it. Absolutely. So when you start saying, well, okay, there needs to be some sort of government support to aid manufacturing, to provide these incentives, you do hit that problem, don't you, where you you get into that big question: how do governments pick winners on all of this? If you're going to be selective, how do you choose?
Well, I don't think you can. I don't think you can pick winners. I think you just need to have a suite of measures that will encourage small, medium and large businesses to invest. So it covers off into taxation reform, but also, again, that Buy Australian Made campaign. I mean, the government needs to spend serious dollars on that sort of campaign, which will help create demand for those products that will be manufactured here. I mean, these three sort of pillars of the plan all interrelate. So they're not mutually exclusive. So, for a significant boost to the manufacturing capability in the country, we need taxation reform and we need IR reform, because we can't compete with $1 a day wages in China and other parts of the world. So all three things need to go in tandem. So we've talked about the manufacturing incentive program. We need comprehensive taxation reform. I mean, we've just been dabbling for 10, 15 years because no one's had sufficient numbers on the floor to come up with anything bold. And we've had this short-termism that's been in the Australian Parliament for 15 years, as there has been in the corporate land. We need some big, bold, long-term decisions to really get us through this.
So in taxation, so they're the three, basically: manufacturing incentives, taxation reform and IR reform. So on taxation reform, I mean, you tend to think of that as saying, well, okay, we're going to cut tax, but we are also going through a period where we're pushing up government debt. And if we believe that government debt has to be repaid somehow, then that's going to have to come from tax, isn't it? So how do we balance those two factors?
Yeah, so we can't raise taxes. I mean, that is the surefire way to sit and languish for another 10 years. We have to grow the pie. The only way to grow the pie is to incentivize investment. So we've come up with a number of different initiatives, both state and federal. So we need to lower the corporate tax rate to 20% or something thereabouts to really incentivize investment in those areas, and that will help Australian-made products compete with overseas competitors, because we have a wage cost here which supports our standard of living. So we're not talking about lowering wages, but for those companies to be able to offer prices at a level that so they can compete, more fairly, we need to lower the other costs of a corporate. So lowering the corporate tax rate to 20%. We need permanent removal of state payroll taxes. They are an archaic tax that were meant to have been disposed of when GST first came in. It punishes businesses as they grow. I mean, you get above $1 million, 1.2 in wages a year, which is the threshold, and then you have to start paying more tax. Why should you be penalised for growing a business? So, there's ways and means for the Australian government to rejig the way the GST is distributed to ensure that the states aren't left worse off. But again, it's all about red tape. Get rid of state payroll taxes. One of the big things that we've been opining on is there's so much tax debt that's going to be accrued over the next 6 months, particularly by SMEs, and they will never have a chance of paying that off. A lot of them will just, if they don't collapse through this process, they'll sit and languish for 5 years under a massive amount of debt, and then most of them will collapse anyway. So if we want the economy to really rebound, we're calling for at least a sort of 50% waiver of all debt that's racked up over the next 6 months. And it's radical. The tax office is already giving refunds now through the cash flow boost scheme, where they're giving up to $50,000 a quarter. That's a write-off. That's a rebate. It's a very efficient rebate, but we're saying that needs to go higher. We know we need to make sure the debt burden, like a corporate, is not unsustainable. You can agree to a 5-8 year tax plan, but that's just not going to solve the problem. So we need some radical reform there, because it's going to get written off at the end of the day anyway, and it'll just hurt the economy on the way through. So we need substantial discussion around that. A big one, for me, it's been talked about by a range of politicians and others over the years, is the issue that a lot of multinationals don't pay a cent of tax here. I'm not talking about a levy across, we've used levies on banks and other things like that in the past to help us through situations, but we need a temporary sales tax. We need to bring that back for large corporates that don't pay a cent.
So forget about tax on profit, which you can manipulate. Use your absolutely use your figures on that. Whatever you're selling in this country, whatever the revenue you're claiming out of this country, you're going to pay, and we know that because you're paying GST on it.
That's right.
We're going to charge you more.
2%, 3%, and it may only last for a couple of years, but they need to do their bit, and at the moment they don't. And Australian public buy a lot of products, and I won't mention all the names, but they're all and there's not many of them. There's only sort of 50 to 100 that would need to share their load, and but for me that's a given, because all the other mechanisms haven't worked to ensure that they pay their fair share. And a bit of as you know, we're huge on mental health, particularly in the round of businesses that get into strife and the collateral impacts on society. So, one for me is, and for us is very simple but very clear. All money spent by businesses or a range of entities that would normally be subject to FBT on this, any money spent on mental health on their staff is exempt for FBT. To encourage
so much a no-brainer. So much a no-brainer.
It is. And there's a lot of talk, and we all know the stress levels and the rates of suicide are going through the roof going into this. It's going to be worse through on the back end of this. So we need to, again, incentivize businesses to spend money on a whole range of different measures that are going to improve the mental health of their workforce, because it's going to be the next big drag on the economy if we don't deal with that. So it's a no-brainer. It shouldn't be subject to FBT.
So a lot of what you're talking about, it sounds like to me there's a big shift here happening in trying to move debt out of the private sector and pushing it onto the public sector, which I personally think is fine for a while, but obviously it goes against the grain of what the prevailing attitude has been over the last decade or so. Yeah,
and look, as you see here, we've come up with a range of a combination of different things. So lowering the corporate tax rate, but also writing debt off, incentivizing businesses to grow, employ more people, getting rid of some red tape. I mean, there's a whole raft of other things we could go through, but these are the big ones that we've thought of.
And I guess the hope is, whatever you're spending on, in terms of reducing taxes, which is pushing up government debt, you're hoping that you're going to see some of that back, because you're going to add to the growth through the manufacturing, the economy is going to be hopefully growing at a faster rate than it was. We've been through a period of so much stagnation, haven't we? Really?
The quickest way to turn a business around or an economy is if you've got some levers that you can pull They're going to grow revenue faster. That's always the best way through these sort of things. Fortunately, we're in a situation here where we can turn that tap on by bringing a lot of manufacturing back onshore. A lot of businesses can't turn that tap on, and you do have to do a level of cost cutting once you've stabilised the business and fix the balance sheet through other means. But here, we do have levers here that will need bipartisan support, but we do have levers that can. As I said before, fortunately, a lot of our manufacturing's gone offshore. So just the very fact of bringing half of that back onshore will create a significant tidal wave of jobs. And, even with a lower tax rate, we'll end up with greater tax dollars to share around, and we will rebound quickly. And the third big pillar to enable all that to happen is we need comprehensive IR reform.
Now, when I see those words IR reform, I think, okay, what's that mean? Does that mean cut wages?
No, it does not. It means getting rid of the complexities. I mean, we've seen, just as an example, right, all the multinationals and businesses that have been caught out, not caught out, but been caught underpaying their workforce. Now, these are not businesses that did this deliberately. We have the most complex system of awards and arrangements in the world. And it's not large corporates trying to rip the system off. I mean, the ABC was one of the big entities that got caught by this, not by choice. And this is all happening over the last 2 years, coming into this crisis. Large businesses, government owned as well as private, couldn't handle and keep up with the complexities of our IR laws, and they act as a drag on the economy. So it's not about making it easier to sack people. It's about getting rid of the complexities and condensing it down. Again, simplify the system. When you've got a really complex system, it takes longer to get things done, it slows down investment, makes it harder to make decisions, and all it does is act as a anchor on the economy. So I'm not saying reduce wages. We don't want to, if we do those other measures, we don't need to reduce wages, and we shouldn't. This is about getting red tape out of the way, making it simpler for businesses to get on and employ people and grow their businesses, which the whole economy will benefit. So we just need a simpler IR platform, and it is way too complex. It's been proven in the last few years, and again, we need a crisis to do some radical thinking around here, and we have this opportunity now, and we need to take advantage of it.
So how do we implement this? Do we need some sort of group that is pulled together from across Australia, across all mixes of society, to try and develop a plan?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I think these are unprecedented times, and I would involve both sides of politics in this, and the independents. There needs to be a coalition of both government and industry leaders to come together and agree on a blueprint. So when the laws start to get drafted, it's already got bipartisan support. So, typically Labor will push back on some of the, perhaps taxation and IR reforms, but maybe not. As I said, this crisis, if we're going to bring a lot of manufacturing jobs back onshore, which Labor and that sort of politics will be in favour of anyway. If this is a package, and as I said, they all work together, maybe fingers crossed, we will get bipartisan support, but we do need that coalition of government, industry leaders, state and federal, and maybe it's an extension of this national cabinet format that the Prime Minister's put together. It's working, and he's got all state leaders all supporting and moving in one direction, and maybe it's just an extension of that, because this sort of outline and turnaround plan that we've come up with is a mixture of state and federal reforms, and they all work together, and they need to work together.
And how quickly could this happen? I mean, I know you look at the first 100 days when you're doing a turnaround. How much could we achieve in 100 days?
Well, I mean, the first phase, as you know, to a typical turnaround is we need to stabilise the situation. So that's what we're going through now. But we need to get onto this really quickly, because as soon as this crisis is over, there will be a tidal wave of bankruptcies, both business and personal. So, I think over the next 100 days, you could agree the plan. You could agree the broad range of initiatives, and ideally have bipartisan support there. And then, there's a bunch of legislation that you'd need to sort of work through. But this is all about signalling to business, particularly, and the public, that there is a comprehensive, economy turnaround plan that is going to be taking shape. Again, it's all about confidence. We've talked about this for eons. Turnaround really is a game of confidence. How do we improve the level of confidence of all of our stakeholders? And the Australian public need to know that there is a comprehensive, well thought out, bipartisan, industry, government led approach that is the best way to turn this economy around, to save as many jobs initially, but then build on that later, and to ensure all of our superannuation nest eggs are not going to be wasted or languishing for the next 10 years, particularly those that are close to retirement. We need to start signalling these sort of initiatives. So I think over the next 100 days, you could easily come up with that plan with effectively bipartisan support, and then and set about implementing those laws over the following 6 months or so. Now's
the time to do it. Look, there's an awful lot of talk, isn't there, about when do we return to normal, or are we going to return to normal, or is it going to be a new normal? Well, I think it's not even going to be a new normal, is it? What you're talking about is new opportunities, a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we've all got to get excited about that prospect, haven't we?
Absolutely.
Great to talk, Michael. As always, see you again soon. Hopefully this comes off. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Phil.
I have to say, I'm quite excited by the opportunity this provides us. So let's not blow it. Share this podcast around and spread the word. That's it for this time on the Vantage Performance Podcast. I'll be back with Michael Fingland again very soon. Thanks for listening.